I'm Agent David Chen, I'm 38, and what happened on Interstate 95 last month still keeps me awake at night. What started as a routine traffic stop became a career-ending nightmare for one officer and exposed corruption that went all the way to the top of a small-town police department. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let me know if you've ever had a run-in with law enforcement that didn't go as expected. And if you want to hear how deep this rabbit hole goes, smash that like button and subscribe because what I uncovered will shock you. Let me set the scene. It was a Tuesday evening in March around 7:30. I was driving back to DC from a field investigation in Baltimore, exhausted after 16 hours of surveillance work. I'd been tracking a financial crimes case for months, following money trails, building evidence, the kind of meticulous work that doesn't make for exciting TV but puts real criminals behind bars. I was in my personal vehicle, a black sedan, nothing flashy. I keep a low profile in this job, had to especially given what I was working on. The case involved public corruption, specifically contracts being awarded through a network of bribes and kickbacks. We suspected it involved local law enforcement in several counties, but we didn't know how deep it went. I was doing maybe 10 over the speed limit on I-95, nothing crazy. Traffic was light, visibility was good, and I was in the flow of surrounding cars. Then I see the red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. My first thought was mild annoyance. I wasn't in a hurry, but getting pulled over meant paperwork delays and potentially blowing my cover if this officer was connected to anyone we were investigating. In my line of work, maintaining operational security isn't just protocol, it can be life or death. I pulled over to the shoulder, hands visible on the steering wheel, and waited. The officer who approached my window was exactly what Central Casting would order for small-town cop with an attitude. Mid-40s, buzz cut, mirrored sunglasses even though it was getting dark, and a swagger that screamed insecurity masked as authority. His nameplate read Officer Reynolds, and he was already writing in his citation book before he even spoke to me. "License and registration," he barked, not even bothering with a greeting. I reached slowly for my wallet, making sure my movements were deliberate and visible. "Good evening, officer. May I ask what this is about?" "Speeding, reckless driving, maybe more depending on what I find." His tone was aggressive, confrontational in a way that immediately raised red flags. This wasn't standard procedure for a routine traffic stop. I handed him my driver's license, which shows my real name but not my occupation. "I wasn't aware I was driving recklessly, sir." He snatched the license from my hand and headed back to his patrol car. Through my side mirror, I watched him spend an unusually long time running my information. Most traffic stops, they're back within 5 minutes. This guy was on his radio for almost 15 minutes, and I could see him getting increasingly agitated. When he returned, his entire demeanor had changed. Where before he'd been aggressive but professional, now he seemed nervous, almost paranoid. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "Officer Reynolds, is there a problem?" I was going with the flow of traffic. "I said step out of the vehicle, now." This was escalating beyond a normal traffic stop. I complied, keeping my hands visible, but my mind was racing. In my experience, when cops get this hostile this quickly, they're either having a bad day or they're dirty. And given what I was investigating, I was betting on the latter. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle." He started patting me down, and that's when things got interesting. Because when you're a federal agent, you carry more than just a wallet and car keys. You carry credentials, sometimes a weapon, and in my case that night, a recording device I'd been using for the Baltimore investigation. His hand stopped when he felt the recording device in my jacket pocket. "What's this?" he demanded, pulling it out. "It's a digital recorder," I said calmly. "What are you, some kind of reporter?" Before I could answer, he continued the pat-down and found my service weapon in its shoulder holster. "Gun," he shouted like he discovered a smoking bomb. He drew his own weapon, pointing it at my back. "Don't move." Now here's the thing about being a federal agent in a situation like this. You have protocols. You're supposed to identify yourself immediately when confronted by local law enforcement. But something about this whole stop felt wrong. The excessive aggression, the lengthy radio check, the paranoid behavior, it all suggested Officer Reynolds might be one of the corrupt cops we were investigating. "Officer Reynolds," I said carefully, "I'm going to reach into my jacket for my identification. I'm a federal agent." "Don't move," he screamed again. By now his backup had arrived. Two more patrol cars, officers jumping out with weapons drawn like they were responding to an armed robbery instead of a traffic stop. This was either the most incompetent police work I'd ever witnessed, or it was intentional intimidation. The backup officers were shouting conflicting commands. "Get on the ground, keep your hands up, don't move." It was chaos, and dangerous chaos at that. When multiple officers are shouting different orders, it creates a situation where compliance becomes impossible. I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of trying to reach for my credentials, I simply stated clearly and loudly, I am Special Agent David Chen with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My credentials are in my jacket pocket. I am armed with my service weapon, which I am licensed to carry. The shouting stopped. Officer Reynolds lowered his weapon slightly, confusion replacing aggression on his face. You're FBI. Yes, and I need to reach for my credentials to prove it. One of the backup officers, who seemed more professional than Reynolds, stepped forward. Agent Chen, I'm Sergeant Martinez. Can you slowly reach for your identification? I carefully pulled out my credentials and badge, holding them where all the officers could see. The change in atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Reynolds went from aggressive to terrified in about 3 seconds. Oh shit, he muttered, holstering his weapon. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Sergeant Martinez examined my credentials, confirming their authenticity with the serial numbers and security features. Agent Chen, I apologize for the confusion. Can you explain why you're in our jurisdiction? This was the moment I had to make another crucial decision. I could have given them a cover story, kept my investigation secret, and let this slide as a case of mistaken identity. But Reynolds' behavior had been so far outside normal protocol that I suspected he wasn't just incompetent, he was compromised. I'm working a federal investigation that may involve public corruption in this area, I said, watching their faces carefully. Reynolds went pale. Sergeant Martinez looked confused. The third officer, whose nameplate read Johnson, exchanged a meaningful glance with Reynolds. That glance told me everything I needed to know. Sergeant Martinez, I said, I'm going to need to speak with your supervisor tonight. What happened next was like watching dominoes fall. Within an hour, I was sitting in the police station with the chief of police, my FBI supervisor on speakerphone, and a very nervous Officer Reynolds who was starting to realize his career was over. It turned out that Reynolds had been taking bribes from a construction company that was bidding on county contracts. When he ran my license and saw that I had a federal security clearance, which shows up in certain law enforcement databases, he panicked, thinking I was investigating him specifically. His aggressive behavior during the traffic stop wasn't bad policing. It was the desperate actions of a corrupt cop who thought he'd been caught. But it gets worse. During the investigation that followed my traffic stop, we discovered that Reynolds wasn't working alone. The construction company he was taking bribes from had connections to organized crime figures we'd been tracking for years. Reynolds was feeding them information about police operations, warning them about raids, even tipping them off about federal investigations. Officer Johnson, it turned out, was also on the payroll. So was a detective in the narcotics division, 2 dispatchers, and most shocking of all, the deputy chief of police. The traffic stop that was supposed to be a minor inconvenience in my evening became the break that cracked open the biggest public corruption case our field office had worked in a decade. Sergeant Martinez, thankfully, was clean. He became our primary cooperating witness, helping us build cases against his colleagues in exchange for immunity. He'd suspected something was wrong for months but hadn't known how deep the corruption went or who he could trust. The trials took almost 2 years. Reynolds pled guilty to bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. He got 8 years in federal prison. Johnson got 6 years. The deputy chief got 12 years and had to forfeit his house, his boat, and his pension. But the most satisfying part of this whole story happened during Reynolds' sentencing hearing. I was there to give a victim impact statement, not because I felt victimized, but because his corruption had compromised dozens of legitimate investigations and put other agents at risk. Reynolds' lawyer had painted him as a family man who made one mistake, a good cop who got in over his head. The judge wasn't buying it. Officer Reynolds, the judge said, you took an oath to serve and protect. Instead, you served your own greed and protected criminals. Your actions didn't just betray your badge, they betrayed every honest officer who puts their life on the line every day. Reynolds started crying, not the dignified tears of someone who's genuinely remorseful, but the ugly, desperate sobbing of someone who's finally facing consequences for their actions. Your Honor, he blubbered, I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just looking the other way for a few $100s. I have kids, I have a mortgage. You had a choice, the judge cut him off. Every time you took money, every time you made a phone call to warn criminals about police operations, every time you betrayed your oath, those were choices. And tonight, Agent Chen almost paid the price for your choices with his life. The judge was right. If I hadn't identified myself as FBI, if those backup officers had been as corrupt as Reynolds, that traffic stop could have ended very differently. Corrupt cops who think they're about to be exposed are capable of anything. The construction company that was bribing the officers got hit with federal racketeering charges. Their contracts were canceled, costing them millions. Several executives went to prison. The organized crime figures we'd been tracking got indicted on a dozen charges each. All because Officer Reynolds panicked during a routine traffic stop. The irony is that I wasn't even investigating him specifically when he pulled me over. I was working a completely different case in Baltimore. But his guilty conscience and his desperate attempt to intimidate me into silence ended up exposing a corruption network that had been operating for years. 6 months after the sentencing, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Reynolds writing from federal prison. He apologized for what happened that night, said he'd found religion, claimed he was a changed man. He asked me to write a letter supporting his early release. I threw the letter in the trash. Because here's what people like Reynolds never understand. It's not about forgiveness or second chances. It's about accountability. When you put on a badge, you're trusted with extraordinary power. The power to arrest, to search, to use force, even to take life if necessary. That power comes with extraordinary responsibility. Reynolds didn't just steal money, he stole trust. He made every honest cop's job harder. He put agents like me at risk. He let criminals walk free while innocent people suffered. That's not a mistake. That's a betrayal of everything law enforcement is supposed to represent. Today, that police department has been completely restructured. New chief, new policies, regular federal oversight. Sergeant Martinez got promoted and is helping rebuild the department's reputation. The construction company went bankrupt and its executives are still in prison. The organized crime figures we arrested are facing life sentences. And me, I got a commendation for the work that followed that traffic stop. But honestly, the real satisfaction comes from knowing that a group of corrupt cops who thought they were untouchable learned that nobody is above the law. Have you ever witnessed corruption firsthand? Have you ever had to decide whether to speak up when you knew it might put you at risk? Share your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story of justice being served, hit that like button and subscribe. Because unfortunately, corruption exists everywhere, and sometimes it takes one traffic stop, one moment of panic, one guilty conscience to bring it all crashing down. The badge doesn't make you above the law. If anything, it should hold you to a higher standard. Officer Reynolds learned that the hard way from a federal prison cell. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we need protection from. But there are still good cops out there, honest agents, dedicated public servants who take their oath seriously. This story is for them, and for everyone who believes that justice isn't just a word, it's a promise we make to each other every single day.